Tonight, we travel back to a time when America believed evil had a face it could recognize. A time when danger looked like the stranger in the dark, not the man who smiled politely at the library door. This is the story of Ted Bundy, the charming killer whose voice was gentle, whose eyes were kind, and whose darkness hid in plain sight. The quiet beginnings. He was born Theodore Robert Bundy, November 24th, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. A cold morning, a secret birth. His mother, Louise Cowell, was only 22 and unmarried. In the 1940s, America, that was a scandal, so she hid her pregnancy at a home for unwed mothers and later returned to her parents' house pretending Ted was her brother, not her son. Ted grew up surrounded by whispers. He learned early that silence could protect and secrets could survive if you smiled while keeping them. Even as a child, neighbors remembered him as quiet, polite, curious, observant. But there were strange moments too. The kind people forget until much later. Small acts of cruelty. Watching people instead of joining them. A fascination with control. When the truth of his parentage came out in his teens, Bundy felt betrayed. The boy who thought he knew his family realized his entire life had been a lie. And from that moment, something dark began to form behind the smile. The all-American facade. In college, Bundy looked like a future politician. Smart, well-dressed, confident. He studied psychology, volunteered in political campaigns, even worked at the suicide hotline, calmly talking strangers out of ending their lives, while secretly learning how people think when they're afraid. He dated, laughed, and blended in. Everyone described him the same way. Charming, helpful, the kind of man you could trust. And that trust became his favorite disguise. Evil, when it learns to smile, becomes invisible. The first disappearances. It began quietly in Seattle, 1974. A series of missing women. Young, bright, always kind-hearted. They vanished from campuses, from parking lots, from crowded places where no one expected danger. Witnesses spoke of a handsome man with his arm in a sling or a leg in a cast. He would ask for help loading books or a sailboat into his car. The car was a faded Volkswagen Beetle, harmless, friendly like him. No one realized it then, but the man with the sling would become one of the most feared names in American history. Police noticed a pattern, but clues were few. No fingerprints, no witnesses who saw the moment of abduction, just the same quiet description. A man named Ted. The double life Bundy's daytime life continued as if nothing had changed. He attended law school. He mingled with politicians. He smiled for cameras at campaign events. At night, he hunted. The contrast was almost surgical. A man living in two worlds without the slightest hint of conflict. That control fascinated psychologists later. They said Bundy's greatest weapon was his ability to pretend humanity flawlessly. He studied how people moved, how they trusted, how they said yes to small requests. Every encounter became a rehearsal for manipulation. And when he struck, it was always the same pattern. Lure, control, disappear. The bodies began to surface in remote areas around Washington and Oregon, hidden in woods, near rivers, under leaves. But identification was hard. Months would pass before families even knew. Fear across the Northwest. By the summer of 1974, the region was terrified. Women stopped walking alone. College campuses changed their security routines. The newspapers called him the Seattle Phantom. Yet no one could picture Ted Bundy, the polite young man everyone liked, as the monster they feared. He kept his Beatles spotless, almost like a prop on a stage. He shaved, dressed neatly, and looked the part of innocence. When questioned casually by friends about the case, he'd laugh and change the topic. Inside, he was thrilled by the chaos he created. Bundy didn't just commit crimes, he orchestrated fear, testing how far he could go without being caught. The name surfaces. One afternoon in July 1974, a young woman vanished from Lake Sammamish State Park in broad daylight. Her name was Janice Ott. A few hours later, another woman, Denise Naslund, disappeared from the same place. Witnesses came forward this time, dozens of them. They all described the same man, handsome, wearing a white arm sling, driving a tan Volkswagen Beetle. And he introduced himself by name. "Hi, I'm Ted." For investigators, it was the first real lead. They compiled a list of every Ted in the Seattle area who owned a VW Beetle. One of those names was Ted Bundy. A co-worker even told police, "You know, that sounds like our Ted." But there was no solid evidence. Bundy didn't fit the profile of a killer, educated, articulate, socially confident. And so the file sat quietly, marked Ted, no connection. The move to Utah. Later that year, Bundy moved to Salt Lake City to attend law school. And as soon as he arrived, the killings began again. In October 1974, Carol DeRonch was leaving a mall when a man approached her, pretending to be a police officer. He said someone had tried to break into her car and offered to drive her to the station. She hesitated, but his badge looked real. She got in. Halfway down a dark road, she realized something was wrong. Bundy pulled into a side street and tried to handcuff her, but Carol fought back, kicked the door open, and ran into the night, screaming. She was the first known survivor. Her description, the car, the fake badge, the calm voice, would later become the key to his downfall. A trail of states. After that, Bundy's crimes stretched across states: Utah, Colorado, Idaho. Each disappearance left detectives confused, a pattern too wide to follow. Before digital databases, connecting crimes across state lines was almost impossible. Bundy used that gap like a highway. He traveled freely, killing and vanishing before local police even knew what had happened. But his luck began to fade. The first arrest. In August 1975, a patrol officer noticed a Volkswagen Beetle creeping through a neighborhood late at night. Inside, he found burglary tools, a ski mask, rope, handcuffs, a crowbar. Bundy smiled politely and explained it away, but investigators recognized the setup from earlier cases. They impounded the car. Forensic tests revealed hair fibers matching missing women, and Carol DeRonch, the survivor, identified him in a police lineup. Bundy was finally charged with kidnapping and assault. Yet even behind bars, he looked calm. He studied law books, representing himself in court. He greeted guards by name. He still smiled. No one could tell how dangerous that smile truly was. Tonight, you have heard the first whispers of the monster behind the mask. In the next part, we'll follow Bundy as he escapes twice and turns a courtroom into his own stage before the nation learns the full horror of what he's done. When darkness learns to walk in daylight, it becomes something else entirely. A shadow that passes through police stations, courtrooms, and handcuffs, still smiling, still calm. Ted Bundy was behind bars, but his story was only beginning. Behind prison walls. In 1976, Bundy sat in a Utah jail awaiting trial for the attempted kidnapping of Carol DeRonch. He read constantly, law books, psychology manuals, anything that might help him study the people who studied him. To the guards, he was polite, tidy, even charming. He offered to help with paperwork, chatted about politics, and kept his tiny cell spotless. But inside his mind, he was mapping exits, every bolt, every hinge, every habit of the guards. Control was oxygen to him, and confinement was suffocating. When the trial came, he represented himself an unusual privilege that gave him access to court documents and the freedom to move between the courtroom and the jail library without close supervision. That freedom became his first weapon. The first escape. In June 1977, during a routine library visit, Bundy asked permission to research his case alone. He climbed onto a bookshelf, reached a small open window, and jumped 2 stories down. He limped into the trees and vanished. For nearly a week, the headline screamed, "Law Student Killer Escapes." He changed clothes, stole a car, and tried to blend in, but hunger and fatigue betrayed him. After 6 days, he was found and recaptured in the mountains. His charm had fooled them once, but now authorities doubled security. Or so they thought. Bundy smiled in his mugshot, a quiet, knowing smile, because he already had another plan. The second escape. Later that year, he was transferred to a jail in Colorado to stand trial for murder. He was kept in a small cell on the top floor, but he studied the ceiling like a puzzle. Over months, using a stolen hacksaw blade and hidden hole, he carved a space above his bed, barely wide enough for his body. He lost weight on purpose, slipping meals to make himself thinner. He hid his progress under cardboard. On New Year's Eve 1977, while guards celebrated below, Ted Bundy crawled through the hole, slithered through the ceiling, and dropped into the jailer's apartment above. He changed into the man's clothes, walked out the front door, and disappeared again. For weeks, the world had no idea where he was. Across the country, Bundy stole a car and began moving south. He crossed states quietly, Chicago, then Atlanta, then Florida, living on cash, sleeping in motels, stealing IDs. He adopted new names, new smiles. By January 1978, he was in Tallahassee, pretending to be a student named Chris Hagen. He rented a room near Florida State University and tried to live normally, but normal was never enough. The hunger returned, the compulsion, the thrill of control. The Chi Omega murders. In the early hours of January 15th, 1978, the campus of Florida State University was quiet. The Chi Omega sorority house stood under the pale streetlight, doors unlocked, laughter long faded into sleep. Bundy crept inside. No one heard him at first. In less than 15 minutes, he attacked 4 women, 2 were killed, 2 survived with severe injuries. He slipped out as silently as he entered, leaving confusion behind him. For the first time, the nation's eyes turned fully toward him. The charm was cracking. Even seasoned detectives felt a cold, unfamiliar horror at the methodical precision of his violence. Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman. Their names became headlines, but Bundy remembered them as trophies. He had crossed the line from predator to legend, something he enjoyed. In his mind, the killings weren't murders, but performances. He left the house calmly, almost relieved, then drove away into the night. A few blocks away, he attacked another student, Cheryl Thomas, who miraculously survived. She described a man with a soft voice and terrible strength. The final victim. 3 weeks later, in Lake City, Florida, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach disappeared from her school. Her body was found 2 months later. By then, Bundy was already in custody again, caught by routine traffic police who noticed a stolen car. When they searched it, they found stolen IDs, wigs, and gloves. The charm had finally run out. The Florida trials. Bundy insisted on defending himself again. He relished the spotlight, the cameras, the reporters, the chance to talk. He smiled at jurors, complimented journalists, even flirted with women in the courtroom. But the evidence was overwhelming. Teeth mark impressions, eyewitnesses, forensic matches from his Beetle. In 1979, he was convicted of the Chi Omega murders and sentenced to death. A year later, another death sentence followed for Kimberly Leach. Yet Bundy continued to perform. He gave interviews, wrote letters, and proposed marriage to a woman named Carol Boone. Right there in the courtroom, while cameras rolled. For Bundy, it was never about life or death. It was about attention. Waiting for the chair on death row at Florida State Prison, Bundy spoke softly, read the Bible, and gave long interviews about society's responsibility. He denied guilt for years, then slowly began to confess. 30 murders across 7 states, perhaps more. Each confession came without emotion, as if he were describing someone else. Psychologists visited him, trying to understand what created such duality, a man capable of kindness and cruelty within the same breath. But Bundy gave them nothing. He smiled, dodged, performed. Final morning, January 24th, 1989. A crowd gathered outside the prison before dawn. Reporters, protesters, and people holding signs that read, "Burn Bundy, burn." Inside, Bundy was calm. He ate a simple breakfast, steak, eggs, toast, juice. When guards came for him, he stood politely, shook their hands, and said, "Give my love to my family and friends." At 7:16 a.m., the current flowed. Seconds later, the man who had once charmed an entire nation was gone. Outside cheers erupted. Some wept, some smiled, and some simply stared at the smoke rising from the prison roof, wondering how long it would take for the nightmare to fade. What remained? In the years that followed, Bundy became a case study in psychopathy. How intelligence and charisma can mask horror. Investigators used his confessions to solve dozens of missing person cases. His story reshaped how law enforcement shared information across states, leading to new databases and profiling methods. But for many, the deeper question remained, how could someone look so human and yet feel nothing at all evil? Bundy proved doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a smile. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, remember, the most frightening monsters are rarely strangers. They are the ones who learn your trust, who walk beside you, who know how to look kind. This was the story of Ted Bundy, the face that taught America that evil can be ordinary. After the last switch was thrown and the crowd outside the Florida State Prison began to drift away, the silence that followed was heavier than the sound of celebration. Ted Bundy was gone, but the questions he left behind had only just begun to speak. The confession years. Bundy's final months were spent in the small, gray cell of death row, a place of humming lights and echoing footsteps. Each day was measured by interviews, letters, and quiet talks with investigators who came seeking answers. He spoke softly, always choosing words as if they were pieces in a game of chess. Sometimes he confessed to names already known. Sometimes he hinted at others, half-finished stories that ended with, "There might have been more." Detectives listened, unsure whether he was helping them or feeding his own legend. Bundy liked to control the conversation. even when his life no longer belonged to him. The mind behind the mask. Psychologists describe Bundy as a classic psychopath. He lacked empathy, but he understood it perfectly the way an actor studies a role. He could imitate compassion, mirror someone's sadness, copy fear, but he never felt those emotions himself. He once told a doctor, almost casually, "I don't feel guilt for things I don't think are wrong." To him, morality was a story other people believed in. His universe contained only himself and the game of staying admired. Yet people who met him still found him magnetic. A journalist who interviewed him said later, "You start to forget what he did because he looks at you the way a friend would." That was Bundy's true skill, not violence, but disguise. The interviews. In the last week of his life, cameras were allowed into the prison. Bundy sat under harsh fluorescent lights, speaking about addiction to pornography and the breakdown of values. Some thought it was an attempt to shift blame. Others believed it was one more act of control, a way to guide how history would remember him. He smiled often during those interviews, sometimes even laughed. Viewers watching from home said it was unnerving. He looked like someone discussing a weather report, not a lifetime of destruction. Still, those hours of footage became some of the most studied material in criminal psychology. Experts replayed them frame by frame, searching for the instant when charm turned back into calculation. Voices of the survivors. While Bundy's words echoed through television sets, the survivors and families of victims tried quietly to rebuild their lives. Some gave interviews years later, not to relive pain, but to remove his control over the narrative. One woman said, "For a long time, he was the only voice people heard, but now we tell the story, not him." That shift from the killer's fame to the victim's dignity was one of the most important legacies of the case. How Bundy changed investigation. Before Bundy, American police departments often worked alone, each limited to its own jurisdiction. His crimes stretched across 7 states, and the lack of coordination allowed him to stay ahead for years. After his capture, agencies began sharing data in new ways, creating the national computer systems and behavioral science units that still operate today. The FBI's early profiling program grew directly from lessons learned chasing men like him. Bundy unintentionally pushed forensic science forward. Bite mark analysis, fiber comparison, blood typing, and eventually DNA research in the following decade. In every modern investigation that crosses state lines, his shadow still lingers in the paperwork. A reminder of why cooperation matters. The psychology of control. Bundy's need for control didn't end with physical dominance. It extended to how he wanted people to think about him. He studied courtroom behavior, learned how to address judges with perfect politeness, and watched himself on news clips as if rehearsing a role. Control gave him identity. Without it, he seemed to vanish. This insight later helped therapists and criminologists understand why some offenders escalate, because control becomes a form of self-existence. In lectures across the United States, professors still describe him as an inverted mirror, a person who shows what humanity looks like when empathy is removed, but intelligence remains intact. Cultural reflection. Decades later, books, films, and documentaries continue to revisit his story. Each retelling changes tone. Some focus on investigation, some on psychology, and some simply ask why society is still fascinated by him. Maybe it's because Bundy looked ordinary, the boy next door, the polite stranger. He blurred the border between safety and danger, and once that line disappears, we start to question everyone, even ourselves. But among true crime storytellers, a new responsibility has grown: to speak softly, to remember names beyond the headline, to study evil without giving it glamour. The legacy of understanding. In classrooms, detectives still play Bundy's recorded interviews. They don't play them to admire him, but to learn how manipulation sounds when it's calm. Recruits are told, listen to how ordinary it seems. If you expect monsters to look like monsters, you'll miss them. This lesson has saved lives not because Bundy taught it willingly, but because society finally listened the right way. Quiet endings. Time moved on. The prison that held him remains. The car he once drove sits in a museum, its pale paint dulled by decades of dust. Visitors stare at it and whisper, trying to imagine the contradiction of that harmless shape and the horror it once carried. But late at night, when those museum lights dim, Bundy's story becomes something else. Not a tale of fear, but a study in awareness. It reminds us that evil hides best in routine, that kindness must be cautious, and that trust is a fragile, precious thing. Reflection. Evil does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It can wear a clean suit, hold a polite conversation, and speak with intelligence and warmth. But beneath the calm voice lies a hunger for control, the same hunger that eventually destroys itself. As you listen, as sleep begins to soften your thoughts, let this story fade into quiet reflection, that awareness can protect and empathy can rebuild. Because for every Bundy who hides behind a smile, there are thousands of gentle souls who choose to care, to help, to heal. And they, not he, are the real shape of humanity. You have been listening to the monster behind the smile. Even decades after the last switch was thrown, the story of Ted Bundy does not fade completely. Shadows linger in the quiet places, in libraries, in parking lots, in the minds of those who study human behavior. But with each shadow comes a lesson, a reminder that awareness can illuminate the darkest corners. The investigator's journey. Detectives who pursued Bundy often described him as the perfect puzzle. He taught them patience, observation, attention to detail. From the Pacific Northwest to Florida, his crimes revealed the weaknesses of an outdated system and the critical need for connection across states. After Bundy, departments began sharing data nationally. Investigators who had once worked in isolation now had access to case files in other states. The lessons were simple but profound. Patterns matter, even when crimes cross borders. Survivors' voices can guide investigations. Charisma and appearance can never replace evidence. Many detectives said Bundy's elusiveness forced them to see criminals not as monsters, but as human beings capable of deceit, patience, and calculated planning. This insight changed modern policing forever. Psychological lessons. Bundy's story is studied in classrooms and forensic labs around the world. His charm, intelligence, and lack of empathy made him a textbook case in psychopathy. Psychologists and criminologists observed manipulation as a tool. Bundy's ability to gain trust shows the subtle power of social engineering. Duality of persona. Outward normalcy can hide extraordinary violence. Obsessive compulsion. Violence was not random. It was ritualized and controlled. But perhaps the most important lesson is subtle psychopaths do not always appear threatening. They can be neighbors, classmates, or colleagues. Understanding warning signs without paranoia can save lives. Cultural reflection. Even in books, films, and documentaries, Bundy's story raises difficult questions. Why does society remain fascinated by evil? Why do we study him again and again? Part of the answer is clarity. He teaches us about human vulnerability, about trust, about ordinary appearances hiding extraordinary danger. And part of it is narrative. People want to understand the how and the why, not to glorify, but to prevent. For your listeners tonight, the takeaway is not fear. It is awareness. It is knowledge that protects. Remembering the victims. While Bundy's name dominates headlines, the victims' stories deserve quiet attention. Young women who were taken, families who waited, survivors who struggled. Their lives are threads of humanity left behind. Many families have established scholarships, foundations, and memorials to honor the lives lost. Some survivors speak publicly, some privately, but all remind us the story is never only about the killer. In every memory, every act of remembrance, there is light, and that light outshines even the darkest shadows. Evolution of true crime. Bundy's case also shaped how society tells true crime stories. Before him, the genre was sensationalized, often shallow, often ignoring victims. After him, reporters, writers, and filmmakers learned to balance suspense with respect, emphasize investigation and psychology, not gore. Modern forensics Bundy also indirectly accelerated the development of forensic science. National databases now connect missing persons and crime patterns. Behavioral profiling became a standard tool in identifying serial offenders. DNA evidence, although not used in his time, now helps close cold cases across decades. The quiet ripple of one man's crimes changed the way law enforcement protects society. From early mistakes, new safeguards arose. The human fascination. Why do people still watch documentaries about him? Because Bundy represents a terrifying paradox. He is human enough to be familiar, but foreign enough to be frightening. But as we reflect quietly tonight, we realize that fascination does not need to breed fear. It can breed knowledge, caution, and empathy. And understanding protects the living. Sleep crime reflection. As you drift towards sleep, remember, not all darkness is obvious, and not all monsters roar. Some walk quietly, smile politely, and vanish into the ordinary. Awareness is a shield. Kindness is a light. Knowledge is a path through shadows. This is the ultimate lesson Bundy left behind, and the one that every true crime listener carries forward. Closing thoughts. Ted Bundy's story is more than headlines, more than fear. It is a reflection on human nature, on vigilance, and on the power of awareness. He reminds us that evil can be ordinary, but society's response, courage, and intelligence can be extraordinary. So tonight, as the world outside rests, let his story fade gently into memory. Let your mind rest, alert but calm, and let knowledge be the quiet guardian of your dreams. As night deepens and the world outside drifts into silence, we return to the story of Ted Bundy, not for fear, but for understanding. The man who walked among us, smiling, charming, seemingly ordinary, left behind shadows that stretched long into history. Yet from those shadows, we can find lessons, caution, and awareness. Understanding the monster Bundy was more than his crimes. He was a study in contrasts, intelligent yet ruthless, polite yet cruel, charming yet terrifying. But in his story lies a central truth. The outward appearance of humanity can mask inner darkness. This is why awareness matters, not paranoia, but careful observation. Not fear, but respect for the unknown. Bundy teaches that ordinary surroundings can hide extraordinary danger, but also that knowledge, vigilance, and empathy can protect us. The ripple effect. The changes Bundy's actions inspired are still felt today. Law enforcement across states now shares information in real-time. Forensic science, profiling, and investigative procedures advanced rapidly. True crime storytelling evolved to emphasize survivors, psychology, and lessons rather than gore. Each of these changes began as a response to a single question: how could such evil walk unnoticed for so long? And in answering it, society became stronger, safer, and wiser. Lessons for the listener. As you listen tonight, remember, trust your instincts, but balance it with calm reasoning. Observe people, patterns, and surroundings, but do not obsess. Respect knowledge, research, and awareness. They are shields against unseen danger. Bundy's story is chilling, not for the violence itself, but for the quiet realization that appearance and reality do not always align. Honoring the victims. While Bundy's name remains infamous, it is the victims who carry the true weight of history. Their lives, their dreams, their families. These are the quiet echoes that remind us what is at stake. Many families years later have created scholarships, foundations, and memorials in their loved ones' names. They turn tragedy into hope, grief into purpose, and silence into education. Their courage outshines the darkness. The human mind. One of the most remarkable aspects of Bundy's story is how it illuminates the human mind, both his and ours. His intelligence allowed him to manipulate and deceive. Our attention, or sometimes lack thereof, allowed him to succeed for so long. Our curiosity, empathy, and resilience allow us to learn from him. Now, understanding evil is not glorifying it. It is recognizing patterns, protecting the vulnerable, and using knowledge to create a safer world. Calm reflection. Let us leave behind fear. Instead, let the story guide you gently. Let the shadows of the past teach, without haunting. Let the ordinary act of awareness become extraordinary protection. As you drift further into sleep tonight, think not of terror, but of understanding. Think not of the crimes, but of the lessons learned. And know that knowledge, vigilance, and empathy are the quiet guardians of our dreams. Closing Ted Bundy's life ended in a prison, but the story he left behind continues to ripple through law enforcement, psychology, and society. He reminds us of the fragile balance between trust and caution, appearance and reality. But you, listening now, are part of the solution. You carry awareness into your daily life. You honor the memories of victims by remembering them, and you allow understanding, not fear, to guide your thoughts. Sleep now gently. Let the quiet lessons of history wrap around you like a soft blanket. The shadows have passed, and knowledge lights the way. You have now listened to The Monster Behind the Smile, the complete story of Ted Bundy, told for understanding, reflection, and calm awareness. Thank you for watching Sleep Crime Stories. Please subscribe our channel and like the video. Also share the video.